Hello everybody. In this video series, I'm going to be covering the flowchart and the level design map. So now that we have the brainstorming and the level design document completed and you have a good idea of what you want to include in the level, the next step in the creative process is going to be creating our flowchart. Alright, so getting into the flowchart, what is the actual purpose of it? I know you've done a bunch of flowcharting already in Game Design 1, where you're just understanding the overall icons that you're using and the flow between each icon and each state of the game. The purpose here is to plan and organize how the player progresses through each area or through your overall level that you're building. So start to think about and answer the questions of where does the player get introduced to your first major mechanic? Where does the player practice that mechanic? How do I get from one area to the next? What are the interactions that the player is going to experience along the way? And really now starting to figure out the ordering of which these interactions are happening. So you'll see in the level design document, there was no specific order that those interactions happen in. Those are just the interactions that are going to take place within the level. During the flowchart, we're going to start to figure out where those interactions take place in the actual progression of everything. Alright, so a few helpful tips to think about when completing the flowchart assignment, because keep in mind this is an ILA activity, so give yourself 2 hours to work on this, right? Get yourself into the working mood or into that working zone, and then set a timer for 2 hours, and then when that 2 hours is expired, you're completed with the flowchart, turn in what you have, and then move on from there. It's really just meant as an exercise to organize and plan your thoughts before you jump into the map. Alright, another suggestion is come up with a few different variations of your flowchart and then pick one from there that you're actually going to push forward with. And I'll talk about that going forward when I show you an example of a flowchart. But really this is your pre-planning or your chance to go back into that open state and design again before you go transition back into the closed state and start to build and implement. Alright, lastly, don't worry and stress about the aesthetics of the flowchart, about what it looks like. This document, this flowchart is just meant to be for yourself, to really give yourself a good idea and a good plan going into the map assignment. So don't worry about what it looks like, that's not important. The map is where you definitely can start to add those details and make it look visually polished. Alright, so getting into it, how do you actually start? You're just going to start with a blank piece of paper and start drawing shapes? What do you actually have to do, and what's a good workflow for completing this assignment? That's what I'm going to be getting into next. Alright, so start by defining each interactive area or each interactive space that takes place in your level. Alright, so what I mean by an interactive area is think about breaking up your level into spaces that the player completes certain objectives or certain tasks. As a level designer and as a designer in general, you don't want to be creating spaces that are so large and empty that there's no interaction, that the player is just walking through empty space with nothing to do. So every space that you're going to create should serve some purpose, whether it's teaching a player a mechanic, or this is the space for a cutscene, or this is the interaction where the featured asset takes place. This is where they complete the first part of their main player goal, right? They break it down into specific objectives they have to complete. But don't create areas that are optional, that the player doesn't have to go into, that there really isn't much content. Focus on breaking down your area into zones that are spaces that the player completes certain objectives. Alright, and then answer these questions, right? What purpose does that space actually serve? What actions take place in there? How much time do you want the player to spend in this space? Start to come up with an idea of where the player is being introduced, practicing and mastering those mechanics throughout your areas. Then from there you can also include one reference image, like you'll see in the background here. Right, so this is an example of a level I made for a flowchart, the top floor showroom, where the player needs to find one of these vehicles and then steal it. You might remember that from my featured asset example. So this would be an example of my reference image for what I envisioned the interactive area to look like. Right, and then over here, this is an example of the interactive area that would exist on my flowchart. Right, so here this shows the name of the interactive space, the overall time that I'm expecting the player to spend in that space. And then here is a list of all of the interactions, specific setups that the player interacts with throughout this area, right? So these setups that you're writing out should be copied and pasted right from your LDD, right? You may have to update them or change them based on the feedback you got from myself or your instructor. But for the most part, you should just be carrying this information forward from the level design document. All right, so I got my reference image here. I have my interactive area and the spaces, the setups that I want the player to complete in that interactive area. Also down at the bottom, I've included these icons. So you'll see on the template for the flowchart, we've provided you with some icons and a legend that you can start to pull from, and you'll use this again for your map assignment. So what I'm doing here is I'm just planning ahead, and I know in the top floor showroom, my featured asset is a vehicle, so I know I'm going to need the car icon or the car object on my map. So I'm just planning ahead knowing I'm going to need a car, I'm going to need a custom script, I need the featured asset, I need a cutscene, I have two of my mechanics, so I have those icons there. And I'm just planning ahead and having a good idea for what I need to include in this interactive area. All right, the last thing I'll say before I move on about the interactive areas is don't limit yourself to just thinking about them as a room, right? Thinking about it as four walls and with a ceiling and a floor, and then the next interactive area is another room, right? And connecting them is a hallway. It doesn't need to be that literal in terms of a room. Think about it as just an area in which something gets taught to the player or accomplished. Right, so say, for example, you want to have an outdoor level, and it's set in, a foresty or woodsy area, right? That forest, maybe, there's no necessarily walls, but that could be broken up into 2 or 3 interactive areas where different objectives or tasks are accomplished, right? So start to break away from just thinking of an interactive area as a room, but just a space in which an objective is accomplished. All right, so here is another example of an interactive area. This is actually a student example. So you can see on my previous one, it didn't look very visually fancy, right? It was just that default blue square with some text inside and some of the icons. This student took a different approach, and he laid out his interactive area in a way to where it shows the image, right, and it has all the icons that are included. The text is very short and concise, though, to where he has it broken up into just intro to water, intro to gas, and hidden health. Then what he did was off to the side of the main flowchart was he had his written notes. So if you wanted any more detail about what was the setup or what was the interaction for each one of these, they were here and included as well. So this is just a different way to represent the interactive areas. And again, this assignment is up to you to use how you'd like. It's really just meant as a tool for you to plan before you get into the map. So if you want to take a different approach, if you want to put a bunch of detail into this or really plan ahead, that's up to you to decide. But here's just another great way to represent this interactive space or this interactive area. All right, next, getting into interactive transitions, right? Having these areas actually connected to one another in different and unique ways. All right, so there's 2 different ways that we can start to think about this. The first is a two-way transition. All right, this will allow the player to freely return back and forth between areas, right? You open up a door or you destroy a wall, right? And now I'm able to walk back and forth between 2 different areas freely, right? I'm able to return to where I once was. Next would be a one-way transition, right? So what these are once you step forward or once you reach a certain point, a triggered event happens and you're cut off from a previous area, right? So as you could start out with something basic where you walk through a door and the door shuts, right? Thinking even higher than that, it could be if we have some type of vertical element to our level, the player drops off the 2nd floor and lands on the 1st floor, and the ledge is so high that the player can't jump up and there's no objects around them for them to climb back up. So that is a one-way transition. Once you drop down into that 1st floor, you're not able to go back. So think about using those to your advantage. Sometimes it is good to cut the player off and don't allow them to go back because we want them to focus on the next objective. But there are some points where you need to make sure that the player can't get stuck. So that's where the two-way transitions help to if the player needs to return to a previous area to collect an item or get some pieces of information, you can use them interchangeably. All right. Then next, thinking about these interactions is tie them to some type of tie the transitions to some type of interaction. What you want to avoid, going back to thinking literally about, your interactive area is a room. So we have one room, and then in between is just a long empty hallway where the player just walks. Right. That's what we want to avoid. Instead, give the player some action to perform, right? As you're saying, jumping off the second floor and landing on the first floor, or crouching underneath a broken a pile of debris, or a broken door, or a broken object, right? Stacking objects up to jump to the higher, the next area, something like that. Any type of interaction is better than just walking forward. All right, and then definitely be creative with this. As I was just giving some examples there, there's plenty of other ways to enter areas than just walking through doors. All right, we walk through doors all the time in everyday life, but we're designing video games, right? We get to do those cool things. We get to break away from reality and come up with unique and cool things that we don't get to do on a daily basis. So rather than opening and closing doors, see if you can come up with cool or interesting ways to get to those next interactive spaces. All right, here's an example of a transition. All right, so real quick, we have the generator area on the left side, and then the control panels, that interactive area on the right. So you can read through. I won't read through all the setup, so if you want to pause and read through these, feel free to do so. But this just shows that on the left-hand side, we find the dynamite and use that to blow a hole in the wall, and will allow you to transition into the control panel area. Right, once that hole has been created and the walls exploded through, we're able to walk back and forth between the generator area and the control panels using that two-way transition. All right, so here is an example of a overall completed flowchart, right? You can see here not the most visually interesting thing, just again a bunch of very basic square boxes, and this is the template that you will be getting, like you'll see at the top. Right, so we have the interactive area, we have the player choice, the one-way and two-way transition, the player start and finish. These icons, these should look familiar to what you used in Game Design 1. The only thing that we're not using is the parallelogram, but I'm sure there's probably a way for you guys as the designers to make use of that shape, right? But the same concepts from what you're using from Game Design 1. So overall, you'll see this shows the progression from the start to the finish of the level. Keep in mind, this has nothing to do with the overall layout of what the level actually looks like. This is just showcasing the order in which the interactions will take place. All right, so a few things to make note. Notice that each interactive space has at least one image associated with it. Try and come up with at least one environmental image for each space. And the key word there is environmental. Right? If you're going to have turrets in your level, I don't really care what your turret looks like. Right? What's more important is how it's going to function and what the gameplay, how you're using that turret. Give me the environmental shot to showcase what you're envisioning for the overall level that you're going to build. Don't worry about individual assets. Focus on the overall level to start to put the pieces together, what it would look like in terms of layout. All right, so from here you'll see, so we got one interactive area per image, right? One to one there. Each one has a time. We have the icons in each interactive space. We got the transition in place. Here you'll see we have one opportunity for a player choice, right? Quote unquote player choice, because we know in the end the player doesn't really have the choice. It's already been made for them, right? So if you want to do this, I know that students really want to create an open world, or they want to create options and choices. Really what you're doing though is you're creating more work for yourself, if we're being honest here. Right? So if you do want to do something like this, where you have this quote-unquote split path, keep it very short and simple. So here is an example where here you can take the elevator or the stairs to get to the top floor showroom. right? So either way, no matter which one you take, you're going to end up on the top floor showroom. Right? If you take the elevator, there's a hidden collectible you can find. If you take the stairs, some of them are broken and you need to platform across, and they can find a health kit. So not very much complexity. It's not like I'm having a big, massive, elaborate setup that the player will miss. It's just two different ways to traverse. Really what I've done here is I've taken one interactive space and divided it into two. So all I'm really doing is doubling up the work for myself when I'm actually going to build this. So be careful with this. You don't have the player start and have them go left and complete one level and have them go right or complete another, right? To have this, basically you're building two levels at once. So keep in mind your end goal here when you graduate is to get a job, right? So you want to showcase all of the work that you've done and highlight all of the skills that you have. So you want all of your work to be seen. If you create a level that's 50% of it is optional, and someone gets to the end and says, "Yeah, that was okay. It was all right," and you say to them as a response, "But wait, you didn't go over here. You didn't activate this thing. You didn't see this over on the side." And they're like, "Yeah, I didn't have to, so I didn't do it." Right? That's on you as the designer. Make sure that players are forced to interact and forced to experience the things that you want them to and the things that you're putting your effort into. So the takeaway from that is just keep it short, right? Keep the split path short or minimal. It's definitely wanted. I see why students would want it, but just be careful with how much work that you're actually tackling with that. All right, then so we've got the times as well, right? In each interactive space, what you can do from here, once you have the estimated time, you can add all of them up, and that will get you your total play time. Right, now you might be wondering, how do you even know the control panel is going to take 75 seconds? So a good rule of thumb, if it's something simple like moving a box to, or jump or crouch, those are about, I would say, 5 seconds, that interaction, right? Anything a little bit more challenging where you have to, move something or use a mechanic, you can estimate it between the 10 to 15 second range. So that's where a lot of my base numbers will come from. So I have in here, I have 5 interactions. All right, 5 times 15, I have is 75. All right, some of these other ones were like pick up the dynamite using the grabnol. That doesn't warrant a whole 15 seconds in my mind. And some of these things you can test yourself as well. About going into Unity in the hub scene and just start to moving some objects around or practice jumping or seeing how long it takes to move around and do different interactions. And as we go forward and go into the map, this estimate will become even clearer. So right now, just it's your best guess, and then moving forward, we can really reduce it down and make sure we're within that 2 to 4 minute range. All right, moving on. This is another example of a completed flowchart. And again, here was that example I used for the interactive area, and you'll see the notes off to the side. So in the center, right, you'll see that's the main flowchart, and you can read through the flowchart and get a good idea as to what each setup is. And both of these examples are included in the assignment themselves. So if it's tough to see in the video, you can open it up yourself and look at the actual flowchart. So you'll see all the detail that went into his notes. He did a great job really fleshing out all the notes and what each interaction was going to be. Note that this work that he's doing isn't going to be lost at the end of this assignment. You're like, oh my God, 2 hours to do all of this, and then we get to move on to the map. If you put the detail into these notes, then from there you can just copy and paste those notes into the map assignment. Right, you'll see there's a notes requirement. Those notes should be building off of the flowchart and building off the LDD and evolving over time. So all of the work you're putting in here will help you and will be used in the map as well. Right, you'll see in the map we encourage everyone to have reference images. Right, 1 reference image per interactive area. That you can accomplish inside of your flowchart.